Blog Talk Radio.
The purple angel, oh purple angel, you're next to me. Purple angel, oh purple angel, you're next to me. Next to me, you're next to me.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. We've got a special show today. Normally we're on Tuesdays, but we've got just a fantastic show lined up for us today, and I'm hoping that you will all share this information with all of your peers. I think you're going to find it very, very informative, to say the least, with this. Today we are going to be talking with Dr. Ashford with MemTrax, and also Curtis Ashford with MemTrax, which is a new measurement system for memory, and it really helps with screening people. And then the second half of the show, we are going to have on Greg O'Brien, who is a veteran journalist who has been diagnosed with dementia, and Dr. Molly Perdue will be with us as well. So I think both halves of the show you will find very informative, to say the least. For those of you that are new to Alzheimer Speaks, let us give you a little bit of background of who we are and why we do what we do. My mom dealt with dementia for 30 years. She started in her mid-50s and just recently passed away at the age of 86. So more than half of my life has been dealing with this disease, and I call myself an advocate on steroids to try to make change. I think we have to get very innovative. I think we have to share information and knowledge around the world if we're going to put a dent in this disease and help people live fully. So I created Alzheimer's Speaks as an advocacy-based company which provides multiple platforms to shift our dementia care culture from crisis to comfort around the world. And we truly believe that by joining forces and sharing knowledge and just having these everyday conversations like we do here on Alzheimer's Speaks Radio, that we're going to be able to remove the stigmas attached to memory loss and help people living with the disease live with purpose, as well as those who are caring for them. At our core, we believe collaboratively we can win this battle. And I know collaboration is working in its highest power, because we were recognized by Dr. Oz and ShareCare as the #1 influencer online for Alzheimer's disease. And let me tell you, we did not do that alone. Alzheimer's Speaks is a one-woman show. It's me, Lori LeBay, and it's your likes, your clicks, your tweets that have put the power behind us in terms of sharing information. So if you haven't done so already, I would encourage you to go ahead and like the show and share it with, if you've got a Twitter account, a Facebook, your Google friends, an email listserv, whatever it is, because you never know who in your community is dealing with this disease in silence. You'd be shocked. But the more information that we put out there, the easier it will make it for people to reach out when the time is right for them. So let me go ahead and give a shout out to a few organizations that I just think are so critically important, and then I'll introduce our guest for our first segment. The Purple Angel Project, if you are not familiar with that, I suggest you go to alzheimerspeaks.com and then go to our About tab and click on the Purple Angel Project. This is the new global symbol for dementia. It is used around the world. Everyone can use it. It's very, very simple. It was created created by Norms McNamara over in the UK, who has dementia, and Jane Moore, and it has spread like wildfire. We want this to be as well known, as well accepted, and embraced as the pink ribbon is for breast cancer, and we know we are making great strides on that, but we'd love for you to join us. So go to alzheimersspeaks.com. Again, go to the About page, and then you will see the Purple Angel Project. If you're looking for an Alzheimer's Association anywhere in the world, I recommend you go to Alzheimer's Disease International. Not only there will you find the closest association to you, because they're the association of all the Alzheimer's associations, but you will get global information in terms of what is happening in our world with dementia. If you are interested in investigating home health, HealthStar is a great company. They're not national, but they are in various states, and I won't even list what they are. But HealthStar is doing some remarkable work with their families who are dealing with dementia, and they have been certified as an Alzheimer's Whisperer. The Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation, that's kind of dear to my heart. They take a holistic approach. So if you're not into pills and you're looking for alternatives of maybe how to prevent or reduce your risk, not only will they show you different ways through diet and food and exercise and meditation, but they have some great educational courses that they offer as well. And then many people are dealing with specific types of dementia, and there's, probably around 100 of them. I don't think we know for sure, but we'll ask Dr. Ashford. He probably has a better idea. I've heard from 70 to 120 different types of dementia. And so some of the most frequent dementias that we hear about, most common, are Lewy body and frontal temporal lobe, or people dealing with aphasia. And all three of these have national organizations that can give you a little bit more comfort and resources regarding the particulars for those dementias. Alzheimer's Music Connect is also a wonderful resource for people just looking to be able to calm themselves as care partners, as well as those with dementia, and engage. And they have some scientific method behind their music, and it's very powerful. They're going to be launching a holiday CD that is absolutely gorgeous, and I'll let you know more information as soon as I get that. And then Puzzle with Me and Jiminy Wicket are also a couple of great resources, again, for social engagement. So with no further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our first guest here. Dr. Ashford graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, and he completed his MD and his PhD degrees. His PhD dissertation was a finalist for the Lindsay Prize for the Best Behavioral Neuroscience for the Society of Neuroscience in '84, and he's going to be telling us some fascinating information, very exciting news that just rolled off today once I introduce him. His original observations have laid the foundation for understanding how Alzheimer's disease affects the neurons in the brain, and in '81 he published the first double-blind study of a drug to treat Alzheimer's disease, which currently is the most widely prescribed class of drug for this condition. In '85, he proposed a neuroplasticity hypothesis of Alzheimer's disease based on the knowledge established with his PhD dissertation. And this theory is a leading model for understanding the pathology of Alzheimer's disease. And again, he's going to be giving us some great information regarding that, some really exciting news. He's also the chair of the Memory Screening Advisory Board for the Alzheimer's Foundation of America, which coordinates the AFA National Memory Screening Initiative, which is absolutely fabulous. In fact, HealthStar the home health care company I was talking about earlier, they used their memory screening tool out at our state fair, and they screened over 2,200 people, and they engaged over 14,000 in just really great conversation, and it wasn't fear-based. It was so powerful. So Dr. Ashford has now developed, and this is why we're going to have this conversation today, a computerized memory measurement system to screen for memory problems, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease called MemTrax. And the memory test is really interesting. It's engaging, it's challenging, and it has potential to efficiently screen for the earliest signs of Alzheimer's disease. And it's inexpensive, and it's a practical test to be had. So welcome, Dr. Ashford. How are you today?
Oh, very well, and very excited, as you mentioned. So I woke up this morning to my radio, which was telling me that the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine was just awarded based on studies of the brain. And one of the things they mentioned was that John O'Keefe from Britain was one of the two groups that won it. And the reason I'm interested in this so much is that I actually referenced his work in my PhD dissertation in 1984 and was actually very much affected by this. His Nobel Prize that was just announced today was for describing cells in an area of the brain called the hippocampus. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people get a little lost when you use the word hippocampus. It basically means seahorse. It's a little structure in the middle of the brain that is absolutely essential for forming new memories. And Dr. O'Keefe was able to look at this, the cells in this area of the brain in rats, which have a very big hippocampus. And the cells of the brain are in this area of the brain, the hippocampus, are able to basically code for particular locations. So as they run around a maze in different areas, different cells in the hippocampus learn particular locations. So the hippocampus is very much involved in learning new information. And the thing is, in Alzheimer's disease, one of the areas of the brain most devastated by Alzheimer's disease is the hippocampus. And the Nobel Prize Committee recognized his work from the 1960s and said that it had direct implications for Alzheimer's disease. And not only that, I believe it, because it was his idea is that there will be cells that would be related to learning new information in the hippocampus, and the hippocampus being affected by Alzheimer's disease. It led me, with work I'd done on my dissertation, to, in 1985, proposing that it was the capacity of the brain to form new memories, that it was specifically attacked by the Alzheimer's disease process. So very much involved in memory, and of course that has led me through many different parts of my career studying Alzheimer's disease, but has led us now to say that if we really want to test for somebody to see if they have a specific memory problem, you have to do it in a specific way where you can give the brain information and then see if the brain is able to remember that information. And that's where we've developed this MemTrax test, MEMTRAX.com. And with this test, we're able to see if a person has any signs of memory difficulties, which are potentially indicative of many things. Alzheimer's disease would just be one thing, but there certainly any particular memory problem would be, this test is very sensitive to it. But Alzheimer's disease, of course, is the thing that we're very interested in.
Okay, great. Before we get into our line of questioning, I also want to introduce Curtis Ashford, who I believe is your son, and he developed an interest in cognitive testing as an undergraduate at California State University, where he graduated in 2011. And in the last 3 years, he has worked closely to develop the simple screening activity to assess changes in memory using social media and computer and internet technology to inform and promote frequent and consistent memory assessments. Curtis is passionate about promoting early detection of memory changes that may be indicative of onset of Alzheimer's or the presence of other causes of cognitive disorders. He's currently leading MemTrax in developing the cognitive assessment software with a sensitivity to evaluate the earliest of onset of memory changes and to promote early intervention before cognitive development disabilities develop. So welcome, Curtis. How are you today?
Hi, Lori. Thank you so much for having us on today.
Well, I'm just excited. I've heard about your company for about a year now, and one of the things I want to ask both of you, and I'll start with Curtis here, is have you been touched personally in your family or a close friend with dementia? Our audience always likes to hear if there's a personal.
My grandfather, actually, my grandpa John, had it pretty bad. I was quite young, probably about 14, 15, as he started to deteriorate, but I would hang out with him, and it was really sad because each time you'd go back, you'd, forget a little bit more about either you or my dad, or you'd just forget somebody's name, and you could definitely pick up on it each time, and you'd know something was going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Dr. Ashford, how about you? Was that your father that had a dementia, or was that the other side?
No, that was my father. But
it was
my interest in this really came from a different direction. I was when I was at Berkeley, and I graduated from there, but I did my MD and PhD at UCLA. But of course, at Berkeley, things were a little radical back in the 1960s, if you might recall.
Yep.
And my interest, apart from all the politics, was that I was interested in trying to live forever. So I was very interested in the aging process and how to stop it. Mm-hmm. And so that was what I studied. And as I studied it more and more, I began to look at the brain as the sort of the master organ that controlled everything. And I figured if I'm really going to understand the aging process, I'll have to understand how the brain controls aging. So that's where I developed an interest in this, and as time went along, I realized that I was not going to be able to stop the aging process. I just had to live the best life I could. But I was still interested in aging mechanisms, and it turned out that as I sort of looked at the population and the baby boomers, which I was a member of, getting older, it looked like that we could do a lot of things to prevent dying. We could not smoke cigarettes, we could live healthier lives and wear our seat belts, and escape a lot of the problems that would cause you to die. But it turned out, as I sort of went and studied things more and more, that the most serious problem I saw looking forward was Alzheimer's disease. And as the baby boomers age and take better care of themselves and live longer and longer, the problem of Alzheimer's disease is just going to be the most devastating problem of this century. And so I got interested in it from that standpoint. And so in 1978, I'd been interested in some different brain mechanisms, but I was the first chief resident on the geriatric psychiatry unit at UCLA and started seeing about, I would say something like 2 out of every 5 of the patients that we admitted couldn't remember something. I'd ask them to remember, say, 5 words or something. They'd come back a few minutes later and say, well, what were those words I remembered? And obviously, anybody could remember those simple 5 words I'd given them. And so like 2 out of every 5 people wouldn't remember that I asked them to remember 5 words. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, wait a minute, this does not make sense. And so I got very interested in I'd been interested in memory already, and so I started trying to say, well, what is the problem? And my mentor at that time was Lissy Jarvik, who had been studying Alzheimer's disease already, 1978. And we started thinking, well, obviously Alzheimer's disease is a heck of a lot more common than anybody realizes, and we better start getting interested in figuring out what to do about it. And so that was sort of studying some of the preliminary things that just had come out that were very specific mechanisms in the brain that had been affected by Alzheimer's disease that involved a chemical called acetylcholine. So we figured out a way of trying to increase the amount of acetylcholine in the brain. That led us to a drug called physostigmine, which was sort of is a drug that's just similar to, quite long enough acting to be used clinically, but it's very similar to drugs like Aricept that are used nowadays, or galantamine or rivastigmine. Rivastigmine is just very closely related to physostigmine. So we did that work in 1978, 1979, published it in 1981. So that was the idea of trying to treat the patients with the disease. And there was a very close similarity to using a drug like this and a drug like the ones that are used for treating Parkinson's disease. But what I quickly realized is that these drugs don't stop the disease. They may just help it a little bit, but they don't stop it. And we really need to understand the disease so we can really stop the disease process somehow completely. And I still believe that that's possible. And if we would go down the right research direction, I believe we can eliminate Alzheimer's disease entirely. But it's going to take some understanding of what the process is. And that's where I then went and developed this theory of neuroplasticity and how neuroplasticity is what's attacked by the brain. And there was just a paper that came out in the journal called Aging, September 2014, just this month, by one of my friends, Dale Bredesen, who runs the Buck Center here in Northern California. And he has a paper titled Reversal of Cognitive Decline, a Novel Therapeutic Program. And he's using a theory that I had developed back in 2002 about if you understand the exact mechanisms by which Alzheimer's is attacking the brain, you can change many different things in your diet and in your environment that may actually stop this process entirely, which is really what we want to do. We don't want people to have their Alzheimer's treated. We want to have it prevented.
Correct.
So
correct.
I'm happy to talk to you much more about that.
Okay. Well, that is wonderful. I know that the Alzheimer's Disease International just came out with a big report about reducing the risk, but I know Mark Wortman, the executive director, was very specific in saying this isn't a guarantee. All of these things that they're mentioning are just good for our bodies as a whole, but it sure as heck can't hurt. To be more proactive, in terms of moving things forward. Can you tell us what are some of the serious problems that we really need to look for if we're concerned about dementia? What are some of the telltale signs?
Well, there's been some misunderstanding about the word signs in terms of medicine, because the Alzheimer's Association has their 10 warning signs. And the thing is, signs are things that a doctor sees, and symptoms are things that patients report, or family members report in this case. And it's really the symptoms that we're worried about that might lead you to see a doctor. The biggest factor that leads you to see a doctor is pain. And the Alzheimer patients, if anything, have less pain. They seem to have less arthritis, so they don't necessarily go to see their doctors very much. And it's not until frequently that somebody actually drags them in to see a doctor that they even get properly assessed. A typical story I tell is that the patients just have usually minimal awareness that their memory is failing. There seems to be some point very early on where there is some subjective awareness of a person having a little bit of memory difficulty, but by and large, that is not really a significant factor. What happens usually is that other people start noticing that a person's having difficulty with their memory. And even doctors, so a patient goes in to see a doctor, and the doctor says, okay, how are you doing, Mr. Jones? And Mr. Jones says, I'm doing fine. The doctor says, well, you had any problems recently? And Mr. Jones will say something like, none that I can remember. And doctor will give you, a couple of minutes. He'll take a quick look at you and say, it looks like you're doing great, because a lot of the Alzheimer patients are actually quite healthy. And he'll say, I'll see you again next year. And so Mr. Jones goes out to the waiting room. Mrs. Jones is waiting there dutifully and wondering what's happening. And she says, well, what did the doctor say? And Mr. Jones says, doctor says, I'm doing great. And Mrs. Jones will say to him, well, did you tell him about your memory difficulties? And he'll say, no, I forgot. And so that's, unless Mrs. Jones actually goes in and tries to make sure the doctor is attentive to that issue, the doctors really don't even have time to deal with it. Most haven't even been trained to deal with the difficulties of memory problems. So it's that's about where we are with the general state of medicine. And one of the first things we need to do is to train doctors to be more attentive to this, and we need to train the population that you have to take some sort of objective measurement of your memory to know if there's a problem. You just can't ask a person how their memory is. And that's why we developed MemTrax, so that people could easily take a test that was fun, that they wouldn't mind taking again. A lot of the tests that the experts in Alzheimer's do on patients to test them for their memory are quite unpleasant. They'll say, okay, I've got 15 words, and I want you to repeat these 15 words, and I want you to repeat them again and again, and they'll come back some minutes later and say, okay, do you remember those 15 words? And I don't know if you've ever done this before, but it's the most unpleasant exercise.
Oh, it's horrible. I'm part of the Minnesota Memory Project, so I go in every year. And the very first year I went, I asked them, I'm like, are you going to let me go home? because I was so stressed out, thinking that I didn't do well. And they're like, oh, you did great. I said, you're kidding. I said I didn't finish this, and I didn't know that. And they're like, Lori, we have to set these tests for people who, have photographic memories and all of this stuff. And I'm like, well, it would have been nice to tell me that up front, because I just thought I did horrible, and then, that adds even more stress. But, I found the more I tried to concentrate on the answers, the worse I did. And when I sat there in a more relaxed state, I did better. But it's hard to sit there in a relaxed state, because it's just boom, 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 boom. You might as well be getting, a lie detector test with the FBI or something. That's what it feels like.
It's exactly right. Yes. And that's why I developed MemTrax, because the whole process was so unpleasant. I want something that was as much fun to do as, say, a crossword puzzle or a Sudoku. And MemTrax is designed to be exactly that. It's designed to be fun and easy, and something you can do at home or you can do in a doctor's office. And it is much more sensitive to whether or not you have memory difficulty than one of these tests that they give.
Well, interesting.
That there's a huge...
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there's a huge problem, in this world, and that's, computers are taking over. They took over the banks, and they've taken over the airline scheduling systems. And with great difficulty, they're taking over the computerized medical record system. But at this point, they've not taken over the computerized testing of mental function. And while I don't know if they really want to take that over entirely, I think that there needs to be some computerization in that area as well.
Well, interesting. I'm going to go ahead and just pull Curtis in. And Curtis, I'm just wondering if you have anything that you wanted to add from the conversation so far in terms of, the need for a screening, like MemTrax, in terms of what are you seeing out there in terms of people's response to your technology?
Wes used to go around and give MemTrax, before it was MemTrax, to retirement homes all around the community, wherever he was. We used to live in Kentucky for a while, and he would go around there and present healthy aging tips and information regarding memory loss and Alzheimer's disease. So after following him around and watching him give out these tests, he would give it out on a slideshow projector and on a big audience, just like about 30 to 40 people, and they would all watch the images and go through the test, and they would have to hand score, hand grade, and go through. And it was just so long and monotonous, the process, and I just wanted to do something. And with the technology, and I'm kind of a computer buff. I really like computers and always have. So I really wanted to take what I knew about computers and use it to help out with this test and bring it online and just get it out to the world, because it was so cool and it's something he was so passionate about. He would just go around on his free time and give this information and try to find out how to detect memory problems, and it's really cool. So I just wanted to get on board with that and help out wherever I could.
That's wonderful. Dr. Ashford, can you tell us, a little bit more about MemTrax? How does it work? What types of if somebody goes online, what is the process?
Well, like I said, the difficulty I had with testing people is you ask them to remember something, and you ask them just a minute later, just after distraction, they can't remember it. But the different tests are sort of awkward that you have to, present something, and you have to come back and say, okay, now do you remember it? And so what we figured out was a way of interdigitating, sort of interleaving the items to remember with the memory challenges. Can you remember what you just saw? And so by presenting, it can be done many different ways, but the way we've done it, in many audiences and have developed it online, we in trying, sort of experimenting with a lot of different things to sort of see what would work. We've come up with just sort of a general outline where we provide 25 very interesting pictures, and the pictures can be, you can at this point you can't choose the pictures, but we've chosen the pictures to be things that would be very interesting pictures to look at, not maybe quite museum quality, but in that direction, so you'll enjoy looking at the pictures. But the trick is we show you a picture, and then we show you another picture, and then we show you a third picture, and the question is that third picture a new picture, or is it something you've seen before? And the test can be very easy or it can be very difficult, depending on how similar the pictures are. And we basically set it up so we have 5 sets of 5 pictures. So we might say have 5 pictures of bridges and 5 pictures of houses and 5 pictures of chairs and things like that. So you can't just sort of simply name something and remember it. You have to actually look at it, name it, and have some encoding of the information in your brain. And then so you see a series of pictures and you see some repeated, and you have to identify the repeated pictures by somehow indicating that as quickly as you can. So we measure response time, recognition time. So you can push the space bar on a keyboard, you can touch a touch screen on a iPhone or Droid or whatever you have. We set it up so it'll work on any particular platform that's computerized, and we can measure your reaction time, and then we can measure your percent correct, and we can measure the percent of items that you falsely identified as being having seen before. So we can get 3 different measures, and each one of those gives a different indication of what kind of difficulties you might have. So it takes we show the pictures for like 3 or 4 seconds, and unless you say you've seen it before, in which case it just jumps on to the next one. And so in really less than 2 minutes, we can get a much more accurate assessment of your memory function than you can with these tests that you have to take up in Minnesota.
Okay. Well, that's nice to know. Curtis, what does the product run in terms of cost to someone?
Right now, it's set up on an annual subscription-based model where you can sign up, and we're looking to have people take it once a week, once a month, just to kind of get an idea of how their overall brain health is doing. So we're really excited that we just got to launch our new website. We've been working on this project for, I think, before around 2009-ish. And back in college, when I graduated in 2011, I was just finishing this website prototype with my buddies. And, yeah, it really just started to take off. We got some really good direction, and we're getting some great traction, lots of users, and it's going great. We're trying to make it really user-friendly, just focus on making it simple, easy to walk through, kind of just very simple for the user, really easy to understand, and also available on lots of different devices, because with technology changing, everyone's everywhere with mobile tech, and we wanted it to work on iProducts, Android, BlackBerry, whatnot, just because that's what people are using, and we want it to be quick, easy, and available, and just a useful tool that people can get to.
Well, and keeping it simple and user-friendly is so important, and yet for whatever reason seems to be underrated in the scheme of things. When people are pulling stuff together, they forget the audience that they're dealing with, and so I think it's very important, and I'm glad to hear that you really tried to keep it user friendly. I just think that that's such a critical piece that so many people developing sites forget about who their end user is and why they're even there in the first place. To me, that's just a massive mistake with that is made repeatedly over there. Dr. Ashford, can you tell us, some of the status of some of the current Alzheimer's and dementia research out there? I know you had mentioned that you thought, that we're going to be able to prevent this, not just cure it, but actually be able to prevent it. Is there one or two studies that really has you excited out there that's going on right now?
Well, aggravated, I think, is the best word for my feeling about Alzheimer's research at this point. Because, like I said, I've been in this since 1978, and I was hoping that we would have finished this whole thing over by 10 or 15 years ago. And here we're still dealing with it. And there was an article that was in both Scientific American and in Nature magazine, which is a very prestigious magazine, in June of this year, that talked about where research was going in the field of Alzheimer's disease. And since about 1994, the field of Alzheimer's disease has been dominated by something called the beta amyloid hypothesis. The thought being the beta amyloid is the cause of Alzheimer's disease. And there were several very solid pieces of evidence that pointed in this direction, but did not indicate that beta amyloid was actually the culprit or the actual cause. And nonetheless, the field has been dominated by this theory of looking for a way of preventing the development of beta amyloid, which is now known to be a very normal protein in the brain, one of the most highly turned over proteins in the brain. And trying to eliminate it would be sort of similar to saying, well, okay, a person's bleeding, let's see if we can eliminate hemoglobin, which might stop bleeding. And it's just been a totally misguided direction. Now, about the same time in the early 90s, there was a discovery that there is a genetic factor related to Alzheimer's disease. Now, nobody likes to deal with genes, particularly if it's going to tell them they have a high likelihood of getting Alzheimer's disease. But there is a gene that was discovered over 20 years ago called apolipoprotein E. And I'm hoping at this point that the field is going to turn back to understanding the apolipoprotein E gene and what it does. The issue is that the amyloid pre-protein is very important in Alzheimer's. This article by Dr. Bredesen described this, and I've actually have been publishing in the same area since 2002. But the amyloid pre-protein goes in two different directions. It either goes to forming new synapses, which are the connections in the brain, or eliminating synapses. And the beta amyloid is important in eliminating synapses, but there's also part that's important to create new synapses. And this is right along the lines with what just won the Nobel Prize today, that there's a constant plasticity, constantly changing connections in the brain, which is what Alzheimer's disease is actually attacking. And if we understand that, and understand how the genetic factor is related to that attack, I think in a relatively short period of time we'll be able to eliminate Alzheimer's disease. And Dr. Bredesen's article in Aging lists about 30 different factors. I've been listing about 10 factors which I thought were important for Alzheimer's disease. He goes on and lists about another 20. And some of them might be right and some of them might not be, but these are the sort of things that we have to look and see all the different things that we can do to prevent Alzheimer's disease. Now, let me give you just one very simple example. It's totally unclear if diabetes is related to Alzheimer's disease or not, but it clearly is related to dementia, and it does cause vascular disease. It may cause small strokes, which may be the second leading cause of dementia. Well, in any case, you want to prevent diabetes. And this type 2 diabetes is very much preventable by doing such extremely onerous things as getting enough exercise and not getting overweight and eating a good diet. And so those are things that probably right off at the beginning would be the best things to consider for preventing Alzheimer's disease, or at least dementia, be, to eat a good diet, get enough exercise, and make sure that you don't tip the scales too far in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
Another important thing that we've seen is that education, people with more education have less Alzheimer's disease. And so we're very much interested in encouraging people, to get good education and continue lifelong learning. So, those are some very simple things. Then you can get into other things that he talks about, things like controlling your blood pressure and, seeing your doctor on a regular basis to make sure your vitamin B12 level's okay, and vitamin D has turned out to be very important. There's a whole series of different little things like this that I think it's going to become more and more important for people to be aware of and try to prevent certain risk factors. One of the big risk factors for Alzheimer's disease is head trauma. So wear your seatbelt when you're riding in your car. If you're going to ride a bicycle, which is very good for you, wear a helmet when you're riding your bicycle. So there's a variety of simple things that I think as we can quantitate them more and more and get people educated about what to do, it turns out that there's some recent evidence suggesting that the incidence of Alzheimer's disease is going down as people are following these good health tips. But we need to have it go way down by getting everybody to follow these good health tips.
I have a question for you, because I know a lot of people in just the community of dementia as a whole are upset that there was reports that the numbers went down, and part of it was that people are worried that it's not going to be taken seriously in terms of the need for funding. But the other piece is people are worried that because there are, we're hearing more about Lewy body, frontal temporal, all of those types of things. So it might not be under that title, and so the numbers might appear smaller, though it's just a different type of dementia. What is your thought on that?
Well, I think that what the autopsy data shows, or looking at people after they've died, I think it's a very good thing to have, a person's brain looked at to see what was actually happening. And, Curtis already brought up the issue of my father having dementia, which, I had the unfortunate experience of watching him from having a very, very good memory to gradually losing his memory. Mm-hmm. And when he finally passed on, I had his brain looked at to see what was actually happening. And it turned out that he had moderate to severe frontotemporal dementia. He had moderate to severe vascular dementia and mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease. So he was 88 when he died. So as you get older, you develop more and more things. Mm-hmm. He had also been riding his bicycle without a helmet, so I know he'd had several head traumas when he'd fallen. And he was also one of the best drinkers in San Francisco for many years, although he never had a problem with it. And he had the lowest B12 level I'd ever seen, so he was not keeping up with his B12 shots. So the thing is that Alzheimer's disease, like you reported your mother having this starting in her 50s, the concern in that is that she probably had unless she had one of the rare early onset genes, that she probably had two of the apolipoprotein E4 genes. Mm-hmm. And these are the genes that I think are so important for us to understand to see if we can't prevent Alzheimer's disease, at least in people who are under 80 years of age. And these, the apolipoprotein E gene codes for a protein that manages cholesterol. And so the management of cholesterol, I think, is going to be an absolutely critical factor for us to understand better to prevent Alzheimer's disease. And not managing it in the body, but actually managing it in the brain. Because cholesterol is the biggest constituent of the brain. Mm-hmm. So it's important for us to know all these things. And I don't know that if we eliminate Alzheimer's disease, people are going to grow older and have other types of dementia. So we have to be concerned about all of these things.
I agree. I totally agree. Yeah, with my mom, she wasn't formally diagnosed until her mid-60s because for 10 years it was just kind of poo-pooed to hormones back then. And when we finally did have her tested, they just did the 10-question test, and she had a good day and she passed, and then it wasn't approachable. And then when my dad got sick, we took her in for extensive testing, and they did 2 or 3 days of testing. and by that point it was horrible. It was just horrible on her. And the test results came back. She's got the mentality of a 3-year-old. Don't let her out of your sight. And it was pretty scary and pretty devastating news to get, even though we saw the decline and we knew as a family and felt as a family that it was more back then. Like you said, the doctors today need more education, but back then it was horrendous. In terms of trying to get to trying to get to the bottom of it, and it's still. I mean, I hear just about a story every day about people going to the doctor and how they're treated or misdiagnosed, and how difficult and painful it is for them to just have to, hang out there and not have the support, or get the diagnosis and then be told, come back and see me in 9 months or 12 months, and here's the number to the Alzheimer's Association, and that's it. And they're just so overwhelmed. So yeah, there's so much that we need to change, and it's exciting. I'm very excited about seeing the dementia-friendly communities and businesses starting to pop up, and the dementia champions, and there's more in the press about it. I just think those are all big positives. I'd like to see more positive stories about the disease, because a lot of it, I think, is still doom and gloom, and that's what scares people from coming out and getting tested, is because it is all doom and gloom. And we've got to give people hope, and we've got to give them support in the process. Otherwise, they're not going to want to find out because of all the negatives attached to it. So we've got a long road to hoe, I think.
Yeah, let me say one thing. We have a paper coming out in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society in the near future about National Memory Screening Day. And it turns out people have been I'd like to see the Alzheimer's Association, the Alzheimer Foundation of America get on a more collegial page here and cooperate with this area, because there's been tremendous arguments about whether screening is harmful or, somehow it's going to lead people down some disaster direction. But I've been very much a proponent for a long time that we need to screen. People need to be aware. There's nothing worse than people having a lack of awareness of a problem. And so we promoted awareness. And in the course of this, as people become aware, the families can then marshal their resources and get organized. And we've shown that we can keep people out of the hospital and provide more efficient care. And if they start taking care of themselves, we can actually do things like substantially delay nursing home placement. There's been several studies that have suggested this. But what we've shown with National Memory Screening Day is that people come in worried about their memory, and we test them. And 80% of the time we say, your memory is fine. Everybody worries about their memory. You learn to worry about your memory, I don't know when it is, about the 2nd or 3rd grade, when you can't remember things that your teacher's asking you to remember. And so your whole life, you're worried about your memory. And as long as you're worried about your memory, you're actually in better shape. It's when you quit worrying about your memory that problems start developing. So we're able to tell people that their memories are not a problem in most cases. And there's a slightly increased amount of people who worry about their memory that actually turn out to have serious memory problems. But since people have serious memory problems, first thing they forget is that they can't remember things. And so in that sense, Alzheimer's disease is merciful to the person who has it, but a complete disaster, as you're talking about, in your experience, to the people who are trying to manage the person.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and it was horrible on my mom too, because she knew something was wrong. I mean, she made herself a 3-ring binder on how to do her job, and routines became so important, and just different ways to adapt in terms of telling time. I mean, she was brilliant. I mean, really, for the stuff that she maneuvered. One of her little simple tricks was just keeping the TV on the same channel, because then she knew by the news and who was on, if it was dinner time or lunchtime or bedtime. And we didn't know what her, deal was with it. Had to be on Channel 4. Well, nowadays they change things up so much. It would be, with programming, it would be difficult for someone to really utilize that in that fashion. But back then, it worked really well for her.
But she didn't tell you that. She didn't tell you that's what she was doing.
No.
Exactly.
There were certain things she told us, and that was usually when she couldn't, when it didn't work anymore, when she didn't have a workaround. But it was, she was absolutely brilliant at covering it up. It was amazing, the things that she did, and I personally think the social engagement is so critical, and I think that's why she lived as long as she lived, was because even in her last 4 years, she was in her end stages, there was still a connection. It wasn't as deep and as vibrant, but she was very engaged with the people who surrounded her, and she was in a nursing home at that time, but it was incredible, and you just see that spark. And for me, I would like to see more research done on the effects of social engagement, and we're starting to see some now, but everything seems to be kind of pharma-driven in terms of a cure. And I think that, from a personal aspect, I think that whole social piece is so critical in terms of how to live and how to care for somebody with it, because, the little magic bullet's a ways out, if there's even going to be one, or if it's going to be, just total change of lifestyle. I don't know, what the outcome is going to be, but I just see that engagement piece as so vital. Do you feel that the engagement piece is critical when it comes to kind of fending off some of the symptoms of the disease at all?
Well, I 100% agree with you. I think it is extremely important, but like I said, education is important. But part of you don't have to necessarily go to school to get educated. Interacting with people, I believe that it's social interactions. I even believe that going to church is good for people. For not for necessarily specifically spiritual reasons, but because of the tremendous amount of support and engagement with other people that a church will offer, or many other types of social organizations will offer. So I think that continuing these sort of things is the sort of stimulations your brain needs to have, and it needs to be non-stressful stimulation, where it's pleasant and keeps you going. And I'll say, my father was extremely social, and even in the last year of his life when he was in a care situation, he was still one of the most pleasant guys anybody knew. And you would go in to see him, and he'd say, "Hey, he's so glad to see you, and so happy that you came to visit him. And do you know who I am?" "Well, I think I do." And he still was living a very rich life, in spite of being sort of unable to remember almost anybody. But I think that it's important, and that was when he was in his late 80s, but he'd been having this problem at least for 10 years. So these things go gradually. It's part of life. You're not going to stop the aging process, is what I've discovered, but you can certainly try to minimize the amount of aging that your brain is doing, and try to maintain your social interactions as best as you can. And the things that I'm suggesting are not so much pharma-driven. Things like exercise and diet I'm not recommending pills for those. In fact, the problem is pharma has been so driven towards the profit motive that this beta amyloid theory, they've wasted about $10 billion studying any drug that would treat that particular condition, when that condition turns out to be a normal condition. That beta amyloid is a normal substance in the brain. And that people who are, the quote, the thought leaders, sometimes aren't really so savvy as to what's really going on.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. It's very spooky, because credibility is so established, and how do I want to say it? But people don't always see it. People just kind of rely, if somebody says that they're doing something and have been doing it a long time, that they're the go-to person. and or the go-to organization, and they have a handle on it, so no one else has to worry about it. And this is a disease everybody needs to worry about. Everybody needs to get involved because nobody can do it alone. It's too massive, and it's so varied. With each individual and each family and each community, what the needs are. We really have to work together as a whole and share knowledge. That's my thought, anyways. I'm kind of crazy on that whole piece of collaboration, and there's not a lot of it out there, and drives me bananas myself. And that's something that I really strive very, very hard to be collaborative and work with others and share. And that's one of the reasons I started the show. And Alzheimer's Speaks as a whole it's about lifting everybody's voice so that they can adapt and have the opportunity to pick and choose what's going to work for them. Versus being told it's A, B, or C, and these are your only options. Because, now that I'm connected, social media-wise, I am shocked. I am just dumbfounded on how many resources are out there that the public does not know about, and it saddens me. It really saddens me that we're not pulling together and working better as a team for the greater good, for a basic sense of community standards and embracement. So, I'm very excited about your MemTrax. I love that it's a test that is fun and engaging, and it's not. It doesn't. The way you've put it together, it doesn't feel like a test. The pressure. Just the wording in terms of what you're asking for, I think makes it a little bit easier for people to be able to adjust and go forward with their answers. So, Curtis, how do people get a hold of you guys with MemTrax if they're interested?
Just go to the website, check out the contact page, or feel free to email me at curtis@memtrax.com.
Okay. And again, the website is MemTrax, and that would be www.memtrax.com. Any final words, Dr. Ashford, that you'd like to add?
Well, Lori, I really appreciate your pushing this, because it's only going to be through pushing this. Unfortunately, the world is really all about politics, and politics is local, and it's about people getting interested and concerned and pushing the establishments to try to find the answers that things get done. So I really, really appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate your having us on the show today to talk about, what I've spent really most of my life trying to get this whole thing moving forward, and really appreciate the help you've given us today.
Well, thank you. I'm so honored that you were able to give us an hour of your time. I know you're very busy, and exciting news, again, with the Nobel Prize information that came out again today. That's fantastic. That's just going to elevate, I think, the research, again, a little bit more, get people a little more excited, and who knows, maybe more money will be pushed at it again, too.
Push us in the right direction.
Yep, that would be fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for being on the show with us. Again, I would appreciate our listening audience if you haven't already, liked us and tweet us and push us out to your friends. This is information that your communities need. Everybody is dealing with this in their own home or in their neighbors. This is a disease that is quite silent on a lot of levels, and it needs attention. And we can raise that level by working together. So thank you so much, Dr. Ashford and Curtis. We will talk with you soon, and I look forward to watching things progress with MemTrax over the years. I'm going to go ahead and just do a mid-program highlight, and then I'm very excited for our next two guests as well today. if you weren't able to listen to our last show, it was titled Giving Hope to Those Dealing with Dementia with Karen Truman. And she has a organization called Dementia Caregivers Resource. And she's got a book out that's just full of resources. And it's all about giving hope. And it's one that if you haven't picked it up, you might want to do. It's called The Dementia Caregiver's Little Book of Hope, and loaded with great information, simple read, easy resource book to be able to grab what it is you need when you need it. Our next show is actually going to be tomorrow. That's Tuesdays are our standard show, and Health Star is going to be talking about adapting the Alzheimer's Whisper program. Health Star is a home health company who has just done a brilliant job in terms of really embracing the needs of those dealing with dementia. And that's going to be a pre-recorded show just because I am going to be speaking tomorrow down in Northfield, Minnesota. And so we did a pre-record of that, so you won't be able to call in or ask questions on that. And then our last Dementia Chats, and that is where I interview people with dementia. They are our experts. We discussed on what goes into making a website dementia friendly, and we talked a little bit about service dogs. Our conversations go so fast on that, and all the webinars are free. We do those on Tuesdays, twice a month, the 2nd and 4th. There will be some changes in schedule there just because of my travel and speaking schedule coming up. So I haven't quite pinned down what we're doing for the 14th. That I may do a replay if we can't get everybody's schedules coordinated on another date there. Our past blogs just recently that were posted, Carol Larkin did a great article on talking about striking features of memory care home solutions. So if you're caring for somebody in your home, what can you do to make life easier, not only for the person with dementia, but for those living with them? And Carol is with Third Age Services, and she always does a great job with her information. We did an article on Code for Armor, which is some new life-saving technology that's simple, safe, and small. And then we posted a couple of articles on Greg O'Brien, who's with us today. He's had some wonderful press, talk so openly, and I'm very excited to have him on the show today. There was also a post that I wrote on Come Dance With Us. I'm going to be doing I'm emceeing for an event for Guyana Homes November 7th here in Minnesota at the Metropolitan Club, and they're going to have ballroom dancers. It's going to be a very fun night. If you're interested in participating or just donating, these are a couple of small group homes that they don't want to have to kick anybody out because they've run out of money, and so every year they raise funds to be able to maintain that quality of care for those who may not be able to actually afford it anymore. So it's a great cause. We also posted on November 30th a person-centered matter videos. It's 60 minutes long. It was put out by the Dementia Action Alliance organization, which is a new national organization that's just going to be launching here. And so that was great. There was also a call to action from Meryl Comer, who is associated with Us Against Alzheimer's, and she's also wrote the book Slow Dancing with a Stranger. Meryl was a journalist herself and took care of her husband for years. And then the last one I want to highlight was just an article by the Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation. They did a nice article on healthy foods and smaller portions being the key to longevity. So that's always good stuff to know. So let me go ahead and introduce Greg O'Brien. Greg has more than 35 years of newspaper and magazine experience as a writer, an editor, an investigative reporter, and publisher. Over the years, he has contributed to the Associated Press, UPI, USA Today, Cape Cod Times, the Boston Irish Reporter, the Boston Magazine, and the list just goes on and on. on. He's been a senior writer. He's just held so many different positions of editor, publisher, managing director, and he's written and edited several books. And he's also been involved in documentaries and done some script writing. So, fascinating background. He was just diagnosed with dementia, and he has written a book called On Pluto, Inside the Mind of Alzheimer's. He now blogs for the Huffington Post and Psychology Today. Greg is married and lives out in, I believe it's Cape Cod, and he's just been, I just learned about Greg, and I've just been so impressed with the work that he's done. So, welcome, Greg. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Well, I've been following you just recently because I didn't know you were out there. I got to tell you, but
I was out on Pluto.
You were out on Pluto, huh? But you are making such a big impact, and I really look forward to hearing your voice very strongly as you've kind of come out of the chutes here on a national and probably international level, because I know my followers are international. And I think you're going to make a really, really big difference. Before I get into our line of questioning, though, Greg, let me go ahead and introduce Dr. Molly Perdue. And she is the author of Exploring the Experiences of Family Caregivers, Cape Cod's Invisible Workforce, and Upholding the Promises of Olmsted for People with Alzheimer's and Dementia-Related Diseases. She is the Director of Family Services at Hope Health Care of Cape Cod, and she's worked with thousands of families and individuals dealing with dementia. Dr. Perdue is an expert in the field of caregiving and dementia care, and she served on the Massachusetts Working Group to create the Massachusetts Alzheimer's Disease Plan and helped create the Massachusetts Silver Alert Policy. As founder and executive director of the newly formed nonprofit called Alzheimer's Family Caregiver Support Center, she continues her work as an educator, clinician, researcher, and advocate for families and individuals living with Alzheimer's and dementia-related diseases on Cape Cod and elsewhere. So, welcome, Dr. Perdue. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Lori, for having me on your show.
Well, I'm just so excited to have you both here. I think this is going to be just a very fun conversation. Greg, I'm going to start out with you. Can you tell us, when did you realize something was wrong, where you were feeling a little bit different?
Well, first of all, a little background might be helpful. My maternal grandfather died of Alzheimer's, and my mother died of Alzheimer's, and I had a front row seat for both. I was the family caregiver for my mother, who died after a bruising, knockdown battle with this demon called Alzheimer's, and she taught me how to fight it. I'm 64, and in my mid to late 50s, I started experiencing horrific short-term memory loss. I didn't recognize people at times, didn't recognize places. At times I saw things that weren't there. Doctors call that misperceptions, but it's really hallucination. I dealt with incredible rage and from the disease, and then I had a serious head injury that doctors say unmasked the disease in making. It's almost like the pro football players who are given to dementia. Then I had the brain scan, the SPECT scan, and the clinical tests, which confirmed the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And then they gave me the gene test, and I also carry a marker gene, one of the chief marker genes for Alzheimer's. And people can Google that, APOE4. And so I I'm in the early stage now, and I'm dealing with what the doctors call a cognitive reserve. Through the blessing of my parents and God, I had a good intellect, and so it's like a reserve fuel tank in a boat. And so I said, I could roll up into a little ball and shake my fist at God, both of which I did, or I could maybe just do what I do, which is report the story, and hence the book Inside the Mind of Alzheimer's. I kept notes for 6 years, 800 to close to 1,000 pages of notes of what I was going through, and then took a few years to write it. Just a final point here. The point about my book, which it's on its way to bookstores, but you can get it on Amazon, is a book about living with Alzheimer's, not dying with it. The dying part comes later, and people, as you know, we all love the stereotype, and the stereotype is, you're in a nursing home, and you're about ready to die, and you got Alzheimer's, and everyone's saying, well, you're gonna die anyway, and that's really not what the disease is about. It's about the journey, and I am incontinent at times. At times, 60% of my short-term memory gone in 30 seconds, including my wife. At times, I don't recognize people, lost in familiar places. When I pick up a phone at times and I can't figure out how to dial it, I hurl it against the wall, or pick up a lawn sprinkler and throw it against a tree because I don't know what it is. And I'll let Molly talk in a minute, but if I could leave you with this, Alzheimer's is the early and the mid as well as the end stage. And in the early stage, there are people like me who are talking and as articulate as I am. And they're coming up to me now in book signings and hugging and crying, saying, thanks for speaking out. And just one kind of overall word picture of Alzheimer's in the beginning, think of yourself in a living room, and you want to read a good book at night. And you're sitting in your favorite chair next to a lamp, and the lamp starts to blink. Alzheimer's is a loose plug in a socket, and so you get up and you push the plug back in, and the light blinks again, and you push the plug back in, and the light blinks again. Now you're getting a little annoyed, and you push the plug back in, and then it becomes over time so loose that the plug falls out. You put the plug back in, it falls out. Pretty soon you can't put the plug back in because it's too loose. Everyone knows that experience. The light goes dark, and that's the end of Alzheimer's. That's the end stage.
Mhm. Well, that's a really nice way to be able to state it so people can visually understand what the disease is like. I know Norm McNamara talks about a Christmas tree lights, and one will go out, and then another goes out, and another goes out, and pretty soon the tree isn't lit anymore. And but your analogy works very well too. I think with yours it made me feel the frustration of those lights going out, because I could picture myself trying to make it work, and I know with my mom, living with the disease for 30 years, there was a lot of frustration in the process.
And the frustration is trying to make it work, and it can't, and that's the real frustrating part. You can't work.
Yep. Well, in one of the things we just came across, I do a lot of speaking, and one of my talks is kind of a town hall meeting, and I had titled it "Living Well with Dementia." And some of our experts on dementia chat said, Lori, we don't like that title. And I said, well, why not? And they said, because we don't feel like we can anymore. A few years ago, we were still able to adapt, and that title we wouldn't have minded it. But now, as the disease has progressed, they're finding that they're running out of options. And so they asked me, can you just call it Living with Dementia? And I said, sure, I'll change that. And so I think it's important for us to have these conversations of, what's respectful to people, because, some things we can change, and that's not going to bring people a ton of comfort. But, if I can add a little and not be frustrating, then that's helpful. That's a good thing. And I think it's very important that we have these conversations. I'm going to go ahead and pull Molly in, Dr. Perdue, and I'm just interested, with you, Dr. Perdue. Have you been personally touched in your family with dementia, or what got you on this path?
Well, Lori, just like you, I was caring for my mother. When I started a family, my mother was starting to suffer from dementia symptoms. She was having difficulty living independently, and she moved from Florida to Cape Cod. At the time she moved up to live with us, we actually had 2 apartments, and she moved into the bottom floor because she was still able to be very independent with a little help. And then she began to progress, and we had to get her the help that she needed, which, we found very difficult, like a lot of families. And it just happens that at the same time I was trying to help my mother and raising 2 small children, I was also working on a PhD dissertation. And my advisors, every time I would have a meeting, my advisors would say, oh, my gosh, we have this meeting and all you talk about is Alzheimer's. So you need to really think about just throwing out your study, throwing out everything you did, and just start anew, because this seems to be your passion. And as anyone going through a PhD will tell you, you're never supposed to do that. You're never supposed to change midstream. But I did, because I was so fascinated by the fact that when you're actually doing this wonderful thing for your family, that there wasn't more out there. And so, as I started researching for my dissertation, I was able to glean a lot of information that actually helped me take care of my mother. And so there was one point where, given the extreme cost of the disease, that there were 5 of us, my 2 small children, my partner, myself, and my mother, living in 960 square feet of space. Thank God we lived in Provincetown, Massachusetts, which was on the water, so we had this wonderful kind of expansive view out the window. But the reality was we really got to experience what it was like for my mother going through her disease progression. And so in that way, we kind of became accidental advocates. And I feel fortunate that I then had my PhD, because I completed it, obviously, and that's why you're calling me doctor. And now I'm able to kind of take that information, take that personal experience, and try to give back and try to help families that are going through this. And so that's what I do now. And, I've been able to amass a lot of experience as the boots on the ground, sitting down with families, doing family meetings, running support groups not only for people that have the disease, that are in early stages of the disease, but for their caregivers as well. And so it's, we need to do a lot of work, because people need a lot of support, and we're just starting to talk about this. And this is why Greg's book, I feel, is so vitally important, and the work that you do is so critical, to get people having these conversations so that we can start talking, so we can start to reduce some of the isolation that families experience.
Oh, I totally agree. Greg, when you first got diagnosed, did you tell family and friends, or did you kind of keep it on the low down?
Well, we live in a wonderful world called denial, and I and one of the chapters in my book is a quote from Mark Twain: "Denial just ain't a river in Egypt," and so I kept it because from people, because I was concerned about what people would say. I was concerned about the denial of my family, because I saw it with my mother. The worst thing in the world is to have these freaking horrific symptoms, and everyone says, "Hey, you look good," and it's almost like the deaf person, the mute person, saying, "Do I look deaf?" And I also, which you'll read in my book, have prostate cancer, which I'd say to someone, "Do I look like I have prostate cancer?" And I'm not treating the prostate cancer, by the way, because my exit strategy, because I saw my mother and my grandfather the final stage, and I don't want my children and family seeing me at that stage. And but people love to do the drive-by diagnosis, and that's why I wrote the book. One of the reasons to articulate on the early and mid stages of Alzheimer's as well as the end stages, to get this nation and this world comfortable talking about it, to get people like myself and others who are either caregivers or in early symptoms or fear they might have it, to speak out. I mean, pro football last night, this week which is wonderful. It's everyone's wearing pink, and they should. I mean, breast cancer is a freaking horrific disease. We need to spend more money. But is there anyone running around at football games wearing armbands for Alzheimer's? This is a disease that's going to outstrip cancer and heart disease sevenfold in 7 years to come. It's going to take the baby boom generation out, and we're afraid to talk about dementia because it sounds like a devil running in the desert. And I hate to say this, but we need to make the word dementia popular, and we need to get people talking about it. And I'm angry. And it's there's an old saying with the Irish, the never get mad, get even, and I'm getting even with Alzheimer's now.
Well, and it's really important what you said. People shouldn't be fearful of the word, but I mean, cancer used to be the C word, and we didn't even, we weren't able to say the word AIDS, and the breast cancer. It's wonderful the way that that's been embraced, and the new, global angel is the purple angel is something that everybody can use, from an individual to a large corporation to a community, to raise awareness, and it's free. It doesn't cost anything, but it's getting people to work together, and that is something that I don't know, I guess as I'm getting older, I'm 55 now, but I realize how we don't work near as well together as we should. There's just that we're set up on this competition platform, and so there's arguments over, should we call it Alzheimer's, should we call it dementia, should we come up with a different name? In the meantime, we're losing footage. We're losing our footage.
We should call it a crisis.
Yeah. Yeah, jump on board. You call it whatever you want, but have a conversation, and do something that's globally attached, because it's so confusing to families, what it is. In fact, I'm gonna ask Dr. Perdue. Can you just tell people, and we've gone over this a zillion times on the show, but it's always interesting to hear how everyone explains it. What is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Oops, I suppose I have to make you live so you can answer. So just a second here. That's my fault. There you go.
That's okay. I'm on now. So
You're
dementia is this set of symptoms. And it is confusing for people. Every time I teach a class, they say, what's the difference? What's the difference? And I think that, knowing that dementia is the symptomology, so the person has to have some failings in two or more cognitive categories. So whether it's memory loss or executive functioning or judgment, they have to have a decline in those abilities that interfere with their daily living. And that's probably, the difficulty around just the semantics, contributes to the fact that only 50% of people that are symptomatic have an official diagnosis where they've gone to see a doctor, they've gone through some type of testing, and they have been diagnosed as having some type of disease. So knowing that there are over 70 different types of dementia-related diseases, and Alzheimer's happens to be the most common, and vascular dementia runs a close second, it becomes critical that families reach out to the medical community to have the conversation about what's happening when someone begins to see signs, of memory loss or cognitive changes that seem to not be normal aging. And that's really what's so critical for people to get, is that, when you start to notice some discernible change in your cognition, you want to start the conversation. And you want to get the information that you need because, as we know, there are reversible types of dementia. So people can lose memory, lose cognitive functioning, and it can be reversible in a few cases, only in 10 to 20% of the cases, but someone could have a vitamin B12 deficiency. Someone could have hypothyroidism. Someone could be suffering from a clinical depression that affects memory. And if you don't start that conversation, you'll never know if you can get some type of medical treatment for those forms. It's and what I researched when I was working on my dissertation, I found an article that I thought was so compelling and so interesting, and it was written by a doctor, and he talked about vascular changes, and he talked about that if we really wanted to do a better job at eliminating so many cases of dementia, we would talk about something as simple, a non-invasive procedure as having a carotid artery, ultrasound. And that if we did a better job at cardiovascular disease, then we could reduce those numbers of cases. And I thought, that's a compelling argument. Now, I'm not a medical doctor, but it sounds as if we all have to get on board. We have to start to create a political force so that we can get people diagnosed, that we can get the educational information out there. If we were in the UK, they have put billions of dollars into providing educational material so that people can be trained and they can understand things like what is dementia and what is Alzheimer's so that they can get the help and assistance and support that they need.
Which is, it's amazing the difference for what they're doing over there and what we're doing here, and their ability to join, and it's not always easy, but it seems to be going better than here in the U.S., the grassroots effort versus kind of the academic medical model seem to work better together overseas than they do here, and I think that that's starting to change. But for me, I'd like to see it change even more. So, Greg, do you have anything that you would add in terms of if someone asked you what the difference is between dementia and Alzheimer's, or?
Yeah, I tend to, because I'm a dumbass, so if I could use that word, tend to try to keep it simple. And as a journalist, I try to, which is one of the things I think that's different about my book. It's the first book written by a reporter embedded inside the mind of Alzheimer's, chronicling his own progression. And I think of dementia as the umbrella under which numerous cognitive disorders, including Alzheimer's, fall. And you need to attack dementia. Alzheimer's just happens to be the most prevalent form of it, but give it any name you want, throw any letters up on the board, but it's loss of self, it's a cognitive decline, you can't remove the brain. This country has to start getting comfortable about talking about its brain.
I agree. I definitely agree. Mm-hmm.
Could I add, I read a support group, as I said earlier, for people that are at early stages of the disease, and they told me they hate the word dementia. They like to refer to themselves as having cognitive impairment at this stage, that they feel that that's a little more accurate. It depicts exactly what they're experiencing, that these are the impairments that are referred to in the actual definition of dementia.
Okay, well, and I think that's really good. I know there's others out there that don't like the word Alzheimer's or dementia, and they say use the word forgetful, because we're all forgetful. We all forget, and it's just the level of forgetfulness that really comes to be. There's so many different words, but I think it's, we have to decide what is comfortable for people, and that's going to change between communities and cultures, and yet we have to have that overall umbrella inclusion.
You raise a. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, and I always have to apologize because what happens is sometimes a thought comes in my mind, and if I don't say it, it's lost, and then I feel like I'm stepping on someone's line. So I apologize. I didn't mean to do that, but this, and I'll only do that when I think it's important. But I write about this in my book. There's, people ask questions. Well, I lost my keys, or I don't know where my car is, and I say, after talking to a lot of doctors at Harvard and around the country, that there's a difference between losing your keys and not knowing you have car keys, and there's a difference between not being able to find your car in a parking lot and not knowing that you have a car. And I'll give you a case in point. When the bug fell out of my head in the last year, I went to, on Cape Cod, we go to the town dump. It's kind of a social event where we throw our garbage. But when I was done, I'm surprised they don't have restaurants there. When I was done, I looked around and I said, oh, my God, how do I get home now? I better call my wife. Maybe someone could drive me home. I drive a freaking yellow Jeep, and it was sitting right in front of me. And my brain did not recognize my car. And it just, the plug pulled out, and it didn't recognize that car. And I didn't know my car was there. And that's the difference between forgetting where you park your car and not knowing that you have a car.
And that's a perfect example of that. And I know, when I talk with people with memory loss, one of the things that they mention all the time is the frustration of people saying, well, you look fine, just because of what you said earlier, that whole denial piece. And they said that just puts them through the roof, because it's like, if I'm telling you I'm having a problem, trust me, it's a problem. This it doesn't have anything to do with what I look like outside, or
well, in the Huffington Post, anyone who wants to Google Greg O'Brien Huffington Post, I wrote a piece about depression called The Black Dog, and I've dealt with clinical depression since I was a young man, and in Alzheimer's it gets even more exaggerated, and people would look at you and go, well, you don't look depressed. Did you think Robin Williams looked depressed? And people make, and I mentioned the comedian Robin Williams, and he's a genius, but the demons, and I'm as guilty as anyone else as a drive-by, okay, because I don't want to deal with crap, and nobody does. It's almost like I ask you, hey, how do you feel? And I'm not really interested. I just want you to know that I asked the question. And I think we need to maybe try to move away from that. If you ask the question, really care, and look inside someone's heart and soul and mind, as opposed to just getting a drive-by. That's annoying for someone dealing with a serious illness. It's very annoying.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to. It just gets my Irish up. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, there's no need to apologize. Everything you're bringing up is fantastic, Greg. So this is wonderful. One of the things that I wanted to ask you was, how has this disease affected your kind of work-life balance? I would imagine that's changed in some way.
Well, there are a lot of things I can't do anymore, and as I say, that and it's the only way I can explain it, the right side, left side of the brain. In medical terms, the doctors look at that differently, but in layman's terms, people can understand it. The creative side of my brain, even though it takes exponentially longer to do things, is still intact as it was with my mother. My mother could speak and articulate almost right up till the last 6-8 months, when she was, it's a marathon race, and at some point the boogeyman's not only going to pass you, but it's going to run you over. And my mother taught me how to run, but in that process, you lose, and Molly will talk about this, a lot of cognitive ability. And so you learn what you can do well and what you can't do well. And, a good example, and I'm not driving as much as anymore, so I don't want people get all upset. But a year and a half ago, I'm driving home from Boston to Cape Cod, and this is my home territory. I mean, you could blindfold me and I could do that, but the plug fell out, and I didn't know in familiar territory where I was. And I remember my mom keep telling me in Alzheimer's, keep asking questions, Greg. And I felt if I pulled over, I was recognizing that I was lost. And being alone and feeling lost is some of the most debilitating feeling in Alzheimer's. I didn't want to be lost even though I knew I was. And I know that sounds dumb, but that's my soul speaking. And so I kept driving, and I was able to control the car. There are people with Alzheimer's who are driving, and they're still able to control the car. And it wasn't until midnight when I was in Boston, it wasn't until about 2 o'clock in the morning, I realized in familiar territory where I was, which was outside Providence, Rhode Island. I had to turn around in a total different direction of where I was going. Had to turn around and then drive another hour and 45 minutes home to Cape Cod. And so you learn, you ask the question, strategies. You learn, okay, I need drivers now. I use my MacBook Pro. You'll never see me without it. It's my brain or my iPhone. I constantly email myself. We all do that, but not to the extent that I'm doing now, because I don't want to forget. I got to tell you, I'm afraid I'm going to forget. And so Friday recently, I looked at my inbox and I said, oh my God, 90 messages. It's Friday. I just need a break. And then I looked in the inbox, and about 80 were from me. So you got to laugh. You have to you got to walk in faith, humor, and hope. But those are my strategies, among other things. And my biggest strategy, and I'm not here to proselytize, but I'll tell you, without my faith in God, and we all find God in different ways, and I appreciate that. Without my faith in God, I'd be a dead man walking. And so that's a big part of my strategy. Molly, okay. Thoughts on strategy?
I just wanted to comment that Greg talks about the plug falling out, and that type of variability of symptoms, when we talk about dementia symptoms, is really confounding not only to people with disease because they're experiencing that, but as well as for their family members. And it's partly what contributes to that sense of denial is that, one moment Greg is sitting there writing a book that is, exceptional, and the next moment, he has difficulty recognizing his wife or finding his way back home. And so, we don't really understand how to relate sometimes to our family members when they're symptomatic, and we don't know, what to say of it or what to do of it when the person is experiencing that type of variability. So it's all these unknowns, I think, that help contribute to this sense of what do we do? What do we focus on? How do we move a national conversation forward so that people can get the support and assistance they need? I've attended some of the meetings in Washington that the Advisory Council on Alzheimer's disease have run, and they talk about this date of 2025 as wanting to slow down, ameliorate, or eliminate, Alzheimer's, or at least slow down the progression by 2025. And I think, all right, it's 2014. There's a lot of people, and there's a lot of lives. If we're talking about 5.4 million people nationally, almost 250,000 that have early onset, and those numbers are just rising exponentially to the sound of a 300% increase in the next 20 to 30 years. And what are we going to, what are we going to do? What are we going to do, and how are we going to help people live with the disease? And this is what's so important about Greg's book, is that he talks about strategies, and what he's just talking about now is to help people, do the day-to-day. When you get up and, as one woman in my group says, it feels like she's had a glass of wine, and then the fog will pass, and then she'll be okay, and she'll be able to go on about her day. So having these support groups for people where they can find others that are suffering from similar symptoms, and they're able to talk about it, come up with strategies, figure out how to get the support they need in a very dignified way. It's really, really important for people.
Oh, I agree. Greg, can I ask you, do you go to a support group?
I started, but the support group was a little took a long time to get to, and so I'm not a joiner, so I didn't want to do that. It felt awkward, and so it just wasn't me. And but I think I would have gone more if it was nearby, but it was too far.
Yeah, well, that makes a big difference, I think, for people, is the accessibility can make a huge difference. Dr. Perdue, you were going to add something on there?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that many people aren't joiners. So support groups might not be for everybody, but part of what I do with families is we have family meetings. And they can be transformational for the family, for the person that has the disease to sit, if they've not had a chance to really meet with all their family members and try to talk about the creation of some type of plan and support. Those family meetings are critical, and they're completely founded in the research. You know, there was seminal research done by the NYU caregiver study where they conducted family meetings. So there's work out there, there's research out there that really talks about counseling is a wonderful paradigm, is a wonderful way to bring the family into the discussion about these diseases and trying to find some way to see their way through. And that has been my experience. My actual boots on the ground experience has been that families that feel that support are really able to make a difference in their day-to-day lives. You know, Greg talked about depression. And this disease is just rife with all sorts of depression. People that have memory loss experience depression. Somewhere up to, I think, around 40% of people that are suffering from Alzheimer's can have some form of depression. It's really hard to diagnose in the person with memory loss, and we don't do a very good job systematically of doing that. You know, caregivers have a very high rate of depression, and most of the time when they talk about the depressive symptoms, they're born out of not knowing how to adjust to the disease progression. And so, you know, support group may not work for one, but a family meeting may work for someone else, or a private care consultation may work for another person.
I think that's very true. One of the things that I've gotten involved in is the memory cafes, and I don't know if you're familiar with those at all, Dr. Perdue or Greg, but those are, and I don't even like calling them support groups, I call them gatherings, because they're very informal, and they're for the person with memory loss and their care partner. And it's a place where people can get back to the core of their relationships, where the disease takes second seat. And people just talk about how it recharges them and it fills them, and everything is safe. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. Everybody is dealing with similar things, and they're learning from one another. And it's really, I brought it over from the UK about 3 years ago to the U.S., and there's probably about 100 of them now in the country. It's hard to track because a lot of them are kind of volunteer based, and you know, there's no budgets. We have no funding here from our government, which they have over there. But they really are more of a gathering. People will come and meet early for lunch or go out for dinner. They swap phone numbers, and it's almost like a mini family, especially when so many people fall by the wayside with this disease. And it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing to see the brilliance within the groups. And each group, you know, is different. We have 3 that all meet at the same time now, and each of our 3 groups has a different personality. And so we twist and we turn to meet the needs of the people who attend, which sometimes I think can be an issue for some groups too, because the rules can be very, very strict, and we just kind of ebb and flow. I always say, you don't bring an agenda when you meet with your friends, and so we're these are very informal. Sometimes I go out of there just laughing, and my cheeks hurts, for 2 hours afterwards because we've had so much fun. So there's all different types of groups that can be tapped into, and a lot of people will tap into more than one, or they'll peek in and just see if it's a fit or not. But it can be so helpful, I think, to be part of a bigger core that understands. But again, I think that person has to come first, within that. And Greg, if you could develop a group, and maybe you're going to say, Lori, what part of this don't you get? I don't want to be part of a group. But if you could put together an ideal group that you feel would support you, what would that look like?
So you're talking about support me?
Yep.
Oh, this, I don't know, this answer might feel, this is just where my head is right now. I want to support others.
Okay.
There is no cure today. So, I want to take what I know, and as a journalist, uplift other people. And in doing that, I'll be uplifted myself. And it for the first time in my life, I maybe become a lot less selfish. And I know there's no cure. And I think, like the course that my mother was on, where she could speak the way I could at this stage, there's going to come a time in 2 years when I'll be on my way out. But I have a strong faith about where I'm going. I believe in heaven. And again, I'm not pushing that on people. I'm just telling you where my head's at. Well, actually, I'm telling you not where my head's at, because that's in a bad place, where my soul's at. And so I want to spend my time helping and uplifting others. So anything I was involved in, and I'm happy to get involved nationally and internationally, would be to help other people to raise the visibility, to get this country and this world to shake a fist at the demon of Alzheimer's. And that's where I would like to spend my time.
Well, I would love to offer you an invitation to join us on Dementia Chats, which is just a webinar platform. You need a headset to be able to plug in, and a video camera, and we can talk a little bit more offline on this. But we never know how many people are going to show up. But people listen to these conversations afterwards, and we don't have really an agenda. We just go in and say, what do you want to talk about today? And we let it go natural, and the people who do join us have fascinating questions and comments. And the feedback that I get from these is, companies are using them for staff training. Families are using them for conversations, to understand their own loved one, because you can't always ask your own loved one the questions you want to. And so sometimes it's safer to be able to ask somebody else who's dealing with it. But the insights are pretty profound, and every single time we do one of these, I walk away with more knowledge. And I'm so thankful for those with the disease being willing to be our experts, because for one, I'm sick and tired of peeking through the window. I just want to open the door and walk in and say, what's going on, instead of this guessing. Let's ask the people who are living it and breathing it on a daily basis. To me, it's just ridiculous that we haven't done more of that more often. And hearing the voice of those diagnosed at conferences is so important too. Over in the UK, Norms McNamara, I'll never forget, he said they had a conference for doctors, and what they did was they had a person with dementia at every round, and then the doctors rotated. And they just got to talk with different people with dementia, and he said the feedback was phenomenal, because they had no idea what it was really like, They had the textbook and they had the research, but the meaty conversations of reality and practicality of living with the disease, they said that they just walked away with so much knowledge and additional compassion in terms of the disease, which I think is very, very important for everyone to be able to partake in. So I'll definitely get you some information on that. Greg, on in your book, what can someone expect to find? Can you just kind of summarize what people will find if they purchase your book?
Sure. And we said before that the book has just been released. Probably the quickest way to get it is Amazon. It's a blueprint. It's strategies of how to live with this disease, not die with it. As I said before, the dying part comes later. Alzheimer's, and this is not for me, but this is from the doctors that I've talked to, can start 5 years or earlier before it's diagnosed. It can take 20 years to run its course. There's a lot of time there. That it's a death in slow motion. It's like having a sliver of your brain shaved every day. So the question becomes, how do you deal with the day-to-day? And in my book, I try to describe how to deal with the day-to-day in humor, in hope, in faith, and with strategies. And also to never give up. As I say in my book, in wrestling, the position of lying down is a position of defeat. Don't lie down. Get up. Keep fighting. And some of us can fight at different levels, but all of us can still, at some level, fight. And then surround yourself with support networks, as we talked about before. Talk about it. Don't be afraid. I say that it's almost like someone with autism or something like that, and I believe this in my heart. That person, that soul, that heart of a person, whether you want to call it a heart or a soul, that person is real inside. They just have a disease that they're fighting through. And I tell people, I'm not stupid. I just have a disease. And to lift people up. And I've learned over the years to speak and write from my heart rather than my head, because my head used to be my best friend. Now I don't see any chance for with my brain for reconciliation, but I've learned to speak from the heart, and so that's what this book is all about. And it's about strategies of pressing on as long as you can. And I know the ending of the book before I read it, but I've asked this question before. I'm the first to say this, but it's very true. Hey, anyone and all your listeners as well who don't think you're going to die someday, please raise your right hand right now. And so there's a end date certain for all of us. So it's the attitude you take as you go through that tunnel, and that's what that book is about.
Mhm. Wonderful. Well, and again, for our audience, the book is titled On Pluto, Inside the Mind of Alzheimer's, written by Greg O'Brien, who is a veteran journalist who has been so kind enough to write his story for us and what this disease is like for him with insights. And I don't think there's anything more powerful than hearing from the voice of this disease. And so, again, I thank you so much for sharing with us. Dr. Molly Perdue, can you tell us a little bit about your organization and the Alzheimer's Family Support Center and how people can get in touch with you?
Oh, absolutely. So the Alzheimer's Family Support Center came out of the research I did in my personal experience. And as Greg was talking about maybe his resistance to going to a support group, but knowing that he needed to create some type of support network around him. And so what we're trying to do is that. So we want to be small enough and fluid enough that we can respond to the needs of our community. So if someone just needs to talk about what they're going to do for mom or dad, we can do that. If someone needs a family meeting, we're able to come and sit and create the family meeting. If someone needs to learn about the disease, we can provide the education. So what we're trying to do at the Alzheimer's Family Support Center is provide free counseling so people can get the help when they need it, and support groups and education and all of that on Cape Cod. So we can be contacted at alzheimerscapecod.com. So that's where we're available right now, and we are also available alzheimerscapecod@gmail, and we can be contacted that way. So I hope I hope that we will continue to get the volume of calls that we've been getting, because people actually need information, and they need to know that they're not alone. And sometimes one telephone call can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely agree with that. Well, I thank you both so much for taking the time today. Again, you can get Greg O'Brien's book, On Pluto, Inside the Mind of Alzheimer's, you can just Google it or go to onpluto.org. But it is available on Amazon, and I think it'll be an exceptional read and one that you'll be glad that you purchased. And if you're in the Cape Cod area, check out Dr. Molly Perdue's Alzheimer's Family Support Center. Everyone is here to help you. It's all about working together. And I'm just so honored that both of you took the time to speak with us today. So thank you so much, Greg. And any last words any last word, Greg, that you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, I would just say, hey, don't give up. This is a disease that's going to be carried throughout a generation. This is a disease that you don't have to hide from. This is a disease that we all stand together on. Just another quick link. Call up anyone who wants to see some films. I was in one of the films, livingwithalz.org. 4 short films done by Oscar-winning producers about living with Alzheimer's. Mine film is called A Place Called Pluto, but and it's done by the Cure Alzheimer's Fund in Boston. But livingwithalz.org.
Oh, wonderful!
Just another reference.
Good.
And you might want to look at it yourself.
Yeah. That one I haven't seen. I've put up, I think, two of your videos so far that I had. And that was done by the news channel, and another one's going this week, and I think another one will go up the following week. So I'm kind of spacing them out so people can.
So you might want to take a look at that, or your listeners, because these are Oscar-winning producers.
Okay, livingwithalz.org. Is that what it?
.org, right?
Okay. Wonderful. Yeah, we'll definitely look at that. Well, wonderful. I'm glad you gave that plug. Cure for Alzheimer's is a wonderful organization as well. Dr. Perdue, any last comments?
Well, yeah, I would like to say that no one should try to navigate this disease alone. And the earlier you identify that you need help and you connect to an organization in your local area, there are lots of local Alzheimer's organizations. The work that you do, Lori, is really important, and people need to either pick up that phone or get on that computer and connect. What research shows is the earlier that they connect to help, the better they will be in the long run. And that is a message that I so want to get out to everyone, that just pick up the telephone and things will eventually will get a little better because you won't be alone.
I think that's very, very good advice. And again, I thank you for being with us today. For those of you who are, again, looking for an Alzheimer's Association anywhere in the world, go to Alzheimer's Disease International. There you'll not only be able to find the association closest to you, but you'll also find great views on the global force and what is happening out in the world of dementia. The Purple Angel Project, go to alzheimersspeaks.com to our About page, and you can get information for the U.S. Purple Angel. We haven't even formally launched it, but the information is there. And, become an advocate. Use it in your email, put it on your Facebook page, your Twitter. You can use this symbol any way and anywhere to raise awareness. It's being shared. So thank you so much. And let's see, our next show again will be tomorrow, Monday, and tomorrow, which is Tuesday. Today is Monday, and HealthStar is going to be talking about adopting their new program called the Alzheimer's Whisperer, and that's worth listening to. They're doing some fascinating work, and I think you'll really enjoy that conversation. So again, thank you all for being part of the show today, and I look forward to talking with you all again. In the meantime, have a great week. Bye now.
Hey everybody, Jared Sebestier, host of Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career 30 or 40 plus years, retiring on Friday, without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. To listen now, search Retire Repurposed on your favorite podcast platform, Senior Resource, or Life Audio.